Fishes are the first group we come to, invertebrates. So just finished, I know that 3 or 4 of you were just there for a whole semester on these guys, but this is our quick, I'd like to finish these today, so yeah, I've got 2 hours. So this is our quick overview of fishes, fish evolution, fish diversity, and then we have a couple labs which we'll start our primitive fishes on Wednesday. So, Subinvertebrata, fishes. Put quotes around it because there is no taxonomic category, no superclass or class that includes all the fishes as a monophyletic group. Fishes are, again, a series of monophyletic groups. And there's our evolutionary tree. I'll rearrange this guy and make sure where I'm going. There's our evolutionary tree. There's tetrapods there. And all this junk in between is fishes. And there's our invertebrates, right? Protochordates. And there's our fishes in there. Okay. This has fossil stuff on it. That's the difference between these two. This doesn't have fossil stuff on it. Anyway, what are we talking about when we're talking about a fish? We're talking about a primitive vertebrate, for one thing. Low-end vertebrates. One quick handy definition of fishes, it's not really an evolutionary definition, but a descriptive one, is it's a gill-breathing aquatic vertebrate. All fishes breathe with gills, for at least some of their oxygen requirement. We talked about this last time. Fishes have other ways to get oxygen, some do, but all fishes have gills. And that's a handy separation because people like Aristotle were arguing about whether a whale and a fish are the same thing, whether we include whales and fishes in the same group. We know we don't, but they're both aquatic. They have fins. They look like, but whales breathe with lungs are mammals. Fishes breathe with gills and are not mammals. So I had this slide up earlier in a different version of it. Fishes represent this array of groups between the invertebrates and the tetrapods. And I'll say this probably 3 more times, so here's the next time. There is no one single taxonomic category. No, fishes are not monophyletic, is what I'm trying to say. There's not one superclass or class, Pisces, that's fishes. It's a series of monophyletic groups between invertebrates and tetrapods. So I just like to start off with the superlatives, and for fishes there are a bunch. So in terms of diversity, 482 families, that's the count I took offline, the recent count, and about 25,000 species. Remember that described it? That means a species has a name. A scientist has identified it and given it a name. That 25,000 is probably half the diversity. If we made a field guide to fishes of the planet Earth, we're thinking 50, 60,000 species. So a big group. Here's the superlatives. That's the largest fish we know of, and next to it, the smallest fish we know of. This little minnow from Southeast Asia, Indonesia, that's a whale shark. And I'll put that in scale. That's an adult of that little thing from that little minnow. And if this bar here is 12 meters, these things get 12 meters long. If that bar is 12 meters, that's 1 meter right there. Divide that by 1,000, and that's that little guy there. He's got a liver, a brain, a pancreas. He's got all the anatomy of any other vertebrate in this tiny little body. Very impressive. Deepest. Fishes have been observed as deep as people go down in the ocean. There's been fishes seen down there. So they inhabit the abyssal depths. It's a very different world down there than ours. 17,000 feet, that's like Pikes Peak. Or what's the highest peak in California? Is that Wheeler Peak? There are fishes at that elevation, the Himalayas. It's a little fish from the Himalayas in southern Asia, in those high elevation snow-fed creeks. From temperature, this little fish from Mexico that lives in a thermal spring that would be uncomfortable for most of us as bath water. It's that warm. And that's his habitat. Doesn't spend all his time. He darts in and out of the hottest of the hot water, but that's pretty impressive. 108, 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a hotter bath than most of us sit in. And then there are fishes that live in water that's so cold, body tissues freeze. It's below the freezing temperature of body tissues, and these little guys have to have antifreeze adaptations to keep their body from freezing. Little fish from the Antarctic. In terms of water, all fish are aquatic, and we have fishes that hypersaline, that means supersaline. This little fish, you'd find him in the Gulf Coast along Texas and Florida, places like that. And can you picture, sometimes you have a beach with dunes, and then behind the dunes there's lagoons? That's sometimes those lagoons are what we call hypersaline. Seawater crashes in there, and then the water evaporates away. And these little guys live in those habitats, sometimes at 3 times seawater. I know, we've gone on with extreme habitats. I just picked a few more. Some of the world's most torrential water on the whole planet is the Congo River near Kinshasa. And this set of rapids is like 60 meters deep. You can't get in there. But there are fishes living in that boiling, churning water. A friend of mine has been down there trying to study those last 10, 15 years. If you've been to the Grand Canyon used to be filled with torrential water, the whole green Colorado Yampa River. And that water there, well, we have native adapted fishes in the western United States that used to live in those habitats. So if there's an aquatic habitat, I guess my point is there's somebody living in it. How about this one? These are cave fishes, little catfishes, and they live beneath San Antonio, Texas, in the aquifer. Hundreds of meters below San Antonio, Texas is an aquifer, cave water. And these little guys live down in those caves and eat little shrimp that live down in those caves. And I think this is kind of cool. Look at the genus name of this little one. And that one means cave catfish, Trogloblanus. So anyway, all fishes have gills for breathing water in terms of their respiration. And all fishes get some of their gas exchange through gills. Although, as we talked about, a lot of fishes have other adaptations. This is a lungfish taking a breath. There are fishes that breathe with lungs or other adaptations. If there's a food source, there's somebody using it. I could think lots of extreme examples. This is one I like. This is a parrotfish, and his teeth are fused into these big clipping shears. This guy eats coral. He clips pieces of coral off a coral reef, crushes it, grinds it up, spits out the sand, the gravel, and digests the little coral animals. Spits out the skeleton. In terms of reproduction, again, there's 25,000 species, a lot of ways to reproduce. This is an extreme example. This is a leaf outside of water, and there's the male and there's the female. They actually jump up out of the water, stick themselves on the underside of a leaf, and they lay their eggs on the underside of a leaf, and then they fall back into the water. And for the next 3 days, the two parents will sit there and splash the eggs with their tails to keep them wet. It's from Brazil. Must have evolved in a place with lots of things that eat eggs. Lifespans. There are little fishes in Africa. Their lifespans are 3, 4, 5 weeks. They live in these temporary little pools in semi-arid regions, and when the rains come and fill that up, well, their eggs were sitting there in the damp soil, in the mud. After the pond dried out, the eggs hatch, these little guys grow and mature. They do their whole lifespan in 3 or 4 weeks before that little puddle dries out, and they leave their eggs in the mud when the puddle dries out. They're kind of cool. As an aquarium fish, there's a group of aquarium hobbyists who just love these things, and they have a whole society and books about them. And they trade eggs with each other by mailing them to each other in little cups of damp peat moss. That's how they trade them. And then some fishes achieve much greater lifespans. That's a sturgeon. And adult sturgeon, easily 150 years old. In general, just while we're on this, the fish is this big, like you're out deep sea fishing and you catch a sea bass or something like that, or grouper. That's probably a 50, 60, 70-year-old animal. The large fishes are old creatures. So anyway, that's just some superlatives. That did that. Let's look at some of the diversity here and hang names on these different things. And we're not going to worry about nearly as much detail as we do in ichthyology, obviously, but I want us to focus on 3 basic types of fishes. There's 3 monophyletic groups still with us. We got a crowd called jawless fishes. We got a crowd called cartilaginous fishes. Again, think shark there. And we got a group called bony fishes. Almost everything you think of when you think of a fish is a bony fish. So, jawless, cartilaginous, and bony. And the cartilaginous and the bony fishes are together joined in the thing we call jawed fishes. So we have jawless fishes, jawed fishes, and jawed fishes, cartilaginous, and bony. We'll look at this in more detail as we go along. Here is an evolutionary tree with just those things laid out. Jawless fishes, jawed fishes. Cartilaginous fishes, the shark crowd, and the bony fishes here. So these are the three groups I want us to focus on. We won't worry about much further down the evolutionary tree. There's an even simpler evolutionary tree there of the three groups we're playing with. 1, 2, 3. I'll let you get that. You're finding these right on Blackboard, or what we call Canvas. Now that's the living stuff. There's all sorts of cool fossil stuff, which I want to highlight. I want to hit, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. They help us understand the story. We don't want to spend a lot of time on them. But these are some fossil groups. So anyway, there we go. Living fishes. Okay, did that. Let's hang some names on these things or become a little more familiar with them. The jawless fishes are called agnatha. The living jawless fishes are called agnatha. And gnathos, that's Greek for jaws. And you put an A in front of a Greek word, and you get the opposite, right? Jawless. Agnatha, the jawless fishes. And there are just a few survivors in this group. This was the first way to be a vertebrate, a very diverse group in the fossil record. There's only a couple survivors. They're called hagfishes and lampreys, and we'll get them out in lab on Wednesday. And we'll come back to them here. The cartilaginous fishes are called chondrichthyes, and I want you to be happy or comfortable with that word. Think shark. And chondrichthyes, if you look at the word there, ichthos is the Greek word for fish, chondro, Greek word for cartilage, chondrichthyes. And that's the shark crowd and a few things you're less familiar with. Sharks, etc., I call that. Finally, the bony fishes we're going to call osteichthyes. In terms of living bony fishes, they're called osteichthyes. And that word breaks out very nicely because oste means bone. Osteichthyes, bony fish. Go to an osteologist when you break a bone, right? No, not an osteopath. That's a...
Orthopedic surgeon?
Pardon?
Orthopedic?
That, yeah, okay, well the word's not there, but these are the bony fishes. And the bony fishes break into two groups. Actually, three groups, but two groups that are fishes. We've got a crowd we call ray fins, and these are ray fins. The rays are the little structures that hold the fin up, ray fins. And then we have lobe fin fishes. Their fins are at the end of little stumpy lobes, like little arms and legs. So ray fins. Did that. Almost everything you think of when you think of a fish is a ray fin. This is the most diverse group by far. So you go to an aquarium shop, go to the aquarium in Long Beach, almost everything you see is a ray fin. The lobe fin fishes, very small group in terms of living species. There's a group called lungfishes that are still with us. We'll talk about them later. And a group called coelacanths that are still with us. And we'll talk about them later as well. A very, very small group, but in a pivotal position in evolutionary. So they're important to our story. As we transition from fish to terrestrial tetrapod, we need to revisit lungfish and coelacanths. And it's worth pointing out a couple things here on this slide. As bony fishes, tetrapods are bony fishes. Tetrapods are in this group. And tetrapods are actually, again, a type of lobe fin fish. Okay, so there's our summary. Any questions about that? So, tetrapods would be coming off here somewhere. I know that's confusing because it's called bony fishes, but that's where they are. So, Okay, now rearrange this. Let's see where we're going here. There is when we add the fossil things. We want to, again, touch on the fossil things, but not emphasize them in this class. So let's look at fish diversity as we move along here. Okay, so this is apparently chapter 24, part 2. Primitive fishes and early fishes is what I want to cover here. We want to focus on the living stuff, but to understand living stuff, we also have to look at the fossil stuff. Did that, did that, did that. All right. Okay. These are the living and fossil jawless fishes, and the fossil ones are these 3 drawings here. It's a really diverse, not group, but a bunch of different groups that are now all extinct, and we have a couple pathetic survivors with us today. This is not a group that managed to survive long term, except in a couple freakish survivors. Much more diverse. 300 million years ago. The living jawless fishes are called agnatha. We touched upon that. And that's the group. It's often given the rank of class or subclass. I'm not worried about it here. I didn't put a rank on it because I'm not worried about it. But this is the taxon to which we assign the living fishes, these freakish survivors. And if we look at an evolutionary tree, here's the agnatha here, these 2 groups. And these are fossil jawless fishes here. And so older textbooks and older ways of thinking combine the fossil and the living into the agnatha. Say it's one group. It's all the jawless fishes are one group. But if you look about that, that would not be a monophyletic group if we wanted to combine all these in one group. It's trying to be paraphyletic because there's an ancestor and we're not including these guys in it. So we don't talk about a monophyletic jawless fishes anymore. Sometimes older textbooks do. Yeah.
Why does it come off like that?
What do you mean, why does it?
The petro, it like comes off, yeah.
I altered it from the textbook.
Oh, okay. I was just like,
your textbook has it coming straight down here.
Okay.
I'm presenting it slightly different than your textbook does.
Okay.
So that's my clumsy editing. So, living jawless fishes do form a monophyletic group in our current way of thinking, but if we add the fossil ones, it's no longer monophyletic. Okay, so living jawless fishes. So here they are. These are all the jawless fishes, and again, the traits that define the jawless fishes are the traits that define the vertebrates. They're the bottom end vertebrates. These are their synapomorphies, and we talked about those. There's another evolutionary tree here. I think this was a little bit easier to grasp. There we are. There's jawless fishes right there. There's the original vertebrate. There's the agnatha. And this doesn't have fossil stuff on it. So let's have a look. They're cool. And we'll get them out in the lab. I've never seen them displayed live, but someone told me they occasionally have them at the aquarium in Long Beach, though they weren't there when we were there last spring. Class Myxini are called hagfishes. Myxin is the Greek word for slime or mucus. And they are eel-like things, but they're not eels. An eel is a bony fish. This is a very primitive eel-like fish. And they are super specialized. And that's another dichotomy, and another thing that's occurred to me in recent years that it's worth emphasizing or pointing out here. You can be really, really primitive, like these guys are, and also really specialized. They're basic primitive vertebrate anatomy specialized into a very narrow niche. And what they do for a living, they're all marine. They burrow around in mud, soft sediments, and they scavenge for dead things. They prey upon soft-bodied invertebrates. They don't have jaws to bite things, but they kind of, well, you see them in lab, they got these little grinding plates in their mouths. So, not a big group. We're talking about only about 40 species still with us. And this is a local one we have off the west coast here. There he is right there. They're kind of cool. We'll get some out. We got specimens we can look at in the lab. So anything alive today, this highly specialized burrowing creature is the most primitive vertebrate. He's not a really good representative of what a primitive vertebrate looks like because he's so specialized. But that's the only thing we have that's living with us today. Like I said, they're highly adapted for burrowing and scavenging. Various pictures of them, they typically burrow into the mud and stick their mouth out for breathing. They can do one really cool thing. They can.
We tried to get them with bait traps a few years ago with ONC, and
that's just a living one. They can do a really cool thing. I think this little guy's going to show it to us. He can tie his body into a knot. There's a sea cucumber there. And he can grab onto like a carcass of a whale and tie himself into a knot and then use that knot to pull against the whale. In the show, and I think that's why I picked this video. There you go. No? That's so cool. So he could grab onto the whale and then cinch that knot down and pull off a chunk of blubber. Kind of cool. So they're typically scavengers. I'm going to turn this video around and run out of time. All my videos in. That's a whale fall, a whale carcass, and you can go to YouTube and find this video. And when a whale dies and sinks to the bottom of the ocean, the hagfish are on it for several years, extracting the blubber and the flesh. They're prodigious producers of slime or mucus. That's a defensive adaptation they have. They can produce enormous amounts of sticky mucus if you handle one. It's like jelly. It's an anti-predator adaptation. This is another video, it's too long to get into, but there's a shark who grabs a hagfish and he gets his mouth full of mucus and this poor shark swims away and goes because it coats his gills and it's hard to breathe then. You'd think they would have learned. Look at those huge eggs. We'll find these in lab on Wednesday. We know almost nothing about their reproduction, which I think is fascinating. It's a pivotal group in the understanding of evolutionary biology of vertebrates, and no one has ever caught a baby hagfish. We don't know what they look like. We don't know where they live. They make these huge eggs. So their reproductive output is fairly low. Where they go, we don't know. So, human interactions with hagfishes. There's a hagfish fishery, and it's fairly large. They're collected for biology labs. We're going to use some in lab on Wednesday. And they're collected for their leather. If you have something called eel skin, it's not made of eel skin, it's made of hagfish skin. That's a long strip of a hagfish right there. I have one, I forgot to bring it in, a little purse made of hagfish leather. We don't eat them in most Western cultures, but in Asian cultures they are part of the cuisine. I don't know why they'd be any different than eating something else that's from the ocean, but it doesn't look very appetizing to me. Those are hagfish. The lowest thing on the vertebrate scale, but not a good representative because he's so specialized. So we can learn something about early vertebrates by studying him, but he's so specialized in his own niche, we have to be careful. And there's still some debate as to just what they are. Are they vertebrates? Are they not? There's a debate there. We're not going to. Okay, moving on. Lampreys. Lampreys are also agnathans, and they're a step up from hagfishes. They're more complex. They're more vertebrate-like. But they're also really, really primitive and really, really specialized. They're also long and eagle-like. That's just a coincidence. And they have a round hood around their mouth. It's filled with little carrying structures for digging into flesh. Those are not teeth. Teeth are bone. We haven't evolved bone yet. And not a big group. Again, just about 40 species. Just a freakish survivors from this ancient time. We do have local lampreys. This is a marine lamprey that would have, in times past, swam up Cayugas Creek or Malibu Creek to spawn. They don't anymore. But offshore, you'd find them in fair abundance. Further north, they're much more abundant. In freshwater streams in Northern California, we do have small lampreys. They're adorable. They're about this big, and they're freshwater. They're landlocked lampreys. And I think 2 of them have gone extinct in the last 50 years. The others are really, really rare. We are not good stewards of our aquatic habitats. So anyway, lamprey natural history, you've probably heard of lampreys, and many of them have a feeding style that makes them kind of infamous. They have this round, sucker-like mouth, no jaws. And what they do is they grab onto a large fish with that, and they dig a hole. They use those scraping plates to tear a hole in the flesh, and then they drink blood. And we call that, these are predaceous lampreys. Okay? I don't know if it's parasitism or predation. They typically call them predaceous lampreys. And this is a pike, but these are there's a lamprey right there. These are lamprey scars. I've caught fish, collected fish over the years, not that often, but occasionally with lamprey scars, you see it. So these are not teeth, it's worth pointing out. They're not made of bone. Teeth are made of bone. These are made of keratin, which is the same stuff your fingernails are made of. If that's not a word in your vocabulary, let's get it there. Keratin is a protein. Your hair is made of it, your fingernails are made of it, as are these structures. And here's a salmon with a healed lamprey scar. It's not usually fatal. It does open them up for infection. That's a bigger one there, a salmon. Now the life cycle of these guys is 2 parts. You have an adult phase that's out there feeding, that predaceous form, and these guys spawn. Eggs sift into the gravel, and the marine lampreys, they'll swim up into freshwater streams like salmon and spawn in streams. And then the larval phase lives in gravel for several years and filter feeds with its pharynx. Breathes with its pharynx, it has gills in there, but also uses its gills for filter feeding. So it's got that ancient niche. And then it metamorphoses into the predaceous form. And that larva is called an ammocoete. We'll look at these in lab. And that's an ammocoete larva, a little freshwater capture there. So several years, buried in the gravel, sticking its head out, filter feeding. Same niche as that early chordate, a very similar niche. So there's an ammocoete larva right there doing its job. Okay. I just, look at how cute this thing is. This is an adult lamprey. It's called a brook lamprey. There are some lampreys that aren't parasitic. And when they metamorphose into adults, they don't feed. They just die. They spend most of their feeding life down here. They metamorphose into an adult and don't feed. They spawn and die. They're called brook lampreys. And they're just really, really cute. We used to catch these in the Midwest. No, not cute. So, Northern California, like I said, we have some of these brook lampreys up here, though. They need unpolluted, flowing streams without non-native creatures eating them, and many of them are endangered. Okay, let's go on here. I think I have a picture of lamprey spawn. I think this is in Ireland. When they spawn, they live in lakes or in the ocean, and they swim up into streams, and males will pull rocks together or grab a big rock and hang on to it, and probably release scents that attract females. And she finds a nice hot guy, she comes up and joins him, and they do this little dance here. Can't remember this video. Yeah, there you go. And there you go. There's eggs and sperm. So the eggs and sperm will drift down, sift into the gravel, and then those ammocoetes, the larvae, will form in the gravel. They're very salmon-like. And I believe they also die after they finish, like salmon do. I just think, there you go, there's another great shot there. When I was in grad school in the Midwest in Oklahoma, we used to go, and you just lie, you get a snorkel and just lie in a clear stream in the Ozarks, and you'd watch this kind of stuff. like bird watching, but it was fish watching. And local people thought we were crazy. You'd be going up to the well and someone would come up and they'd poke you out, you'd drown. We're just fish watching. We're okay. So anyway, these ammoseeds are interesting. We'll look at them in lab. And they're interesting because their anatomy and their niche, there's an ammoseed, there's Amphioxus, that's the invertebrate. And you know what we're talking about there, right? That's the cephalochordate. The niche and the anatomy are very, very similar. So we think something like this, layered on the vertebrate traits, became a primitive vertebrate. It's thought to be evolutionary history. So there's a lamprey larva, an ammoseed. There's Amphioxus. Very similar anatomy, very similar niche. Some of you I know, I've talked to some of you over the years, and some of you are thinking of going into conservation, and aquatic conservation in California actually now includes lampreys. It does at the moment. Everything's out the window with these lunatics in Washington right now. But these are the lamprey conservation zones along the west coast. You think, why are we worried about lampreys? Well, they have a really bad image. That people think, oh, it's like a mosquito, or it destroys the fish we like. And most of that imagery comes from something that's not the lamprey's fault. The Great Lakes, right there, had a huge fishery in them, native fishes, and people exploited them for food and money. And in the 1800s, a series of canals were built that connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. And those sea migrating lampreys had access to the Great Lakes. They never had access to the Great Lakes before we built those canals. There weren't lampreys in here. But once the sea lampreys got in there, they destroyed the fishery. That's what they do. These fish had no adaptations against lamprey predation, and they didn't know what to do. And so that's a lot of people's view of lampreys comes from this, which is not their fault. They never should have been in the Great Lakes to start with. Once they were there, they took advantage. And so if you were, again, going into conservation or management in the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes states, in aquatic management, you might spend a lot of time with lamprey management, or if you're interested in that, and that's to conserve the fishery. And as with any time we screw something up, the remediation efforts are often expensive, difficult, and highly intrusive. Controlling lampreys is very difficult. So anyway, lampreys are eaten. And again, I'm not in this culture so much, but in Portugal and Spain and Asia, these are Portuguese dishes for lampreys. I think they look so nasty to me. Yeah. But apparently Japanese think cheese is the most revolting thing they've ever seen, so there's a lot of cultural differences. King Henry I died one night and in 1135, and after dinner they include a surfeit of lampreys. And I looked up surfeit, that's an old English word, it means shitload. So he ate a lot of lampreys and died there. With regard to lamprey conservation on the west coast, lamprey migrations and exploiting them were a very important part of the Native American cultures. You got a food resource like lampreys that swims right by in very predictable times of the year. You're going to take advantage of that, just like you would salmon or migrating birds or whatever. And some of the cultures along the west coast here are Native American cultures are reacquiring some of their traditional heritage, and among them is lamprey fishing. I think, and that's one of the things that's driving lamprey conservation is these people want it, and they have a right to it. So I love this picture here. Afterwards, there's these beautiful salmon steaks salmon flakes being roasted over the open fire, and there's the lamprey. I just think it would be chewy and rubbery. I don't know. So, oh gosh. Summing up the agnatha. Remember, agnatha are the living jawless fishes. They are freakish survivors of a once very proud, huge diversity of jawless fishes. We got some highly specialized freaks that came out of that once great diversity. So highly specialized, narrow niches, not very many of them. I want to hit the fossil ones. I may have to edit here. I'm still trying to figure out how this course works in the summer. So if you see me edit things, you think, okay, I don't want to spend 10 minutes on that. It's just, maybe we're not as pressed for time as I think we are. But, Let's look at some of these fossil things. Fossil jawless fishes. So there's several groups down here, and there's different classifications, but we're not going to worry about the classification so much, but I want to give you a couple of these groups and give them names for you. So here's the agnatha. These are the most primitive living jawless fishes. The fossil stuff is more sophisticated. We got survivors off the very primitive end of it. And again, here they are. Here's the fossil ones. We don't join the fossil ones with the living ones in a monophyletic group anymore. Older textbooks do, but that's not the way it works. One of the things that defines the rest of the vertebrates, we're finished with the agnatha, but the rest of the vertebrates, and that includes these Stracoderms as a fossil group of jawless fishes, is bone. We didn't see bone in these agnathans, but everybody else shows bone. And that's kind of cool, because once we have bone, we get good fossils. So defining the whole rest of the vertebrates is bone, mineralized bone in the dermis. So agnathans don't have that. Everybody else does. Mineralized bone in the dermis. The dermis is that layer right under your skin. And we'll just call it bone. And there you go, examples of it. Who was the first creature to get bone? There's the jawless fishes. There's another evolutionary tree there. All the jawless fishes there, starting right there. There's the radiation of all the jawless fishes. And no jawed fishes come out of there. And there's the living ones and freakish survivors off the very primitive side of the jawless fishes. And all this stuff is in the fossil record. And just a cool diversity there. These guys radiated out. They had the niches. They had all the fish niches you could get. And then this stuff came along, the jawed vertebrates, and pushed most of it, well, pushed all of this into extinction. And all we're left with is these guys. So mineralized bone. That defines everything else. The first group to have bone, the first group we know in the fossil record is a crowd called conodonts. That dagger means it's extinct. Conodont means cone tooth. Dont means tooth. Cone means cone. These are their tooth elements. This is the bone we're talking about. And for 150 years, this is all we knew about them. These things were collected in sediments, categorized, classified, but no one knew what the animal was. A lot of people thought it was a snail, parts of a snail shell. About 15, 20 years ago, an intact fossil was found with these little elements and an impression of the animal. And we finally thought, oh, damn, it's a vertebrate. Finally got the pieces put together. And these little tooth elements, as they turn out to be, here they are. And they're in the pharynx, they're in the mouth of these little creatures. Here's a reconstruction. The little creature appears to be a little thin fish-like thing with gill openings and huge eyes. And those two things are for scraping or processing or carrying up food. Don't know exactly how they lived. But that's the first bone we know about. And it's a fossil like this that finally let us understand that. Maybe we'll have time to get these out in lab. I bought some stream sediments from Indiana. And this is sand. These are grains of sand. And these are conodont tooth elements. Is that the only one? It looks like there's one right there. But that's how they're normally collected. You sift them out of sand. So the next group up, that's conodonts, little creatures we don't know a whole lot about because we don't have any good fossils on them. The next creatures up are called ostracoderms. And notice there's two unrooted lines here, 200 lineages. There's a whole bunch of lineages here. We don't understand the pattern yet, so we'll just put quotes around it, say it's a mess of groups. And there's a fossil of one, and look at the name there. Oh, I need to put a dagger there. Dermis, skin, ostracus, bone, bony skin. These were heavily armored jawless fishes. And they radiated widely. There's quite a diversity of these things. Again, it's not a taxonomic category, it's just a descriptive word. There are all sorts of them. And again, these are more sophisticated than the survivors. These are above Hector's and Lamprey's on our evolutionary scheme. And these are reconstructions, but they radiated all sorts of body shapes and probably niches and biologies. They, for a long time, this is what you were if you were a vertebrate. This was the type of vertebrateness, and there was quite a diversity of them. Just a few random things about Strachoderms in general. They're mostly small. They're heavily armored. Their skeleton was internal. It was made of cartilage, so we kind of got a shark skeleton there. And they didn't have a lot of sophisticated mobility. Most of them were benthic. They were benthic means bottom. They were sitting on the bottom. And they were, and I said this a whole bunch of times, they were really quite diverse. The reconstruction of them. Some guy's been, I don't know who this is, he does these really cool paintings, and, how accurate it is, don't know, but, it matches the fossil. And look at this cool one here. I would guess if I looked at this, look at these things, they didn't have jaws, so they're probably filter feeding. They're probably using that pharynx for filter feeding. And I'll bet this is a tool for stirring up the muck in front of them, or stirring up the muck in front of them to bring that material, then they can suck it up in their mouth. I don't know, but that's kind of neat. So anyway, Strachoderms came in two basic flavors. We can talk about some simple and more primitive ones. These guys here, they have names, we're not worried about them. And then there's another radiation of more sophisticated ones, fancier ones. We have primitive Strachoderms and we have the fancy ones here. And it's these guys. It's these fancy Strachoderms, this radiation here, that leads us into jaws. The ancestor of the jawed vertebrates is one of these guys, somewhere in here. And the jawed vertebrates are called gnathostomes. Stome means mouth, gnathos means jaws. Gnathostomes. And everybody else we're going to talk about is that gnathostome. You're a gnathostome. So there's a big diversity of gnathostomes. We're going to hit a few of them, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. And then we want to spend most of the time with the living ones. And there's reconstructions of some of these real primitive ones. Tore my finger on the staple. That's the jawless fishes. I'm going to introduce jawed fishes, and then we'll take another few minutes. Any questions up to this point? I know it's tiring. Anyone fly transit? Get on a transatlantic airplane, fly transatlantic or transpacific? Summer session always reminds me that when you walk in, and when you get on a long airplane flight, like it's going to be 7 hours, you sit down and go, I'm going to be here for 6 hours. And you settle in, you get comfortable. That's how I think of summer session. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours. Questions? Let's introduce jawed fishes, gnathostomes, and then we'll take a break. Did that. Okay, this is gnathostomes, it's the jawed fishes. So we're going to use this chapter to explore the diversity of jawed fishes. And we're going to set up the transition. I don't think we'll get to today, we'll do it Wednesday. We'll set up the transition from fish to tetrapod. The gnathostomata. This is the gnathostomata. So these are the jawless things, the agnatha and the fossil jawless things. And these are the gnathostomes, with frogs representing all the diversity of tetrapods. So got some fishes in here we're going to play with as we move towards tetrapods. So, just taking out this stuff so we can just focus on where we want to go. So the gnathostoma, just define it, it's fishes, the jawed fishes, plus the tetrapods. There's an early jawed fish, or a reconstruction of an early jawed fish. They weren't very sophisticated, and their jaws were pretty kind of slappy-like things. But in a world where no one else has jaws, you're suddenly at the top of the food chain. So that was a big change. So something that if we could identify it, we would loosely call an ostracoderm, one of those advanced ostracoderms, layered on the gnathostome traits, the traits that define the jawed vertebrates, the gnathostomes. And that's this guy down here. That's that ancestor. And that was the progenitor of all this stuff here. And I don't have little daggers here. The things that don't get all the way to the top, those are fossils. So these are fossil groups that should have daggers, but I didn't just notice that. So there's jawless ostracoderms, the advanced ones, the fancy ones. And these are early gnathostomes, reconstructions of them, early jawed fishes. So let's look at some of these traits here. What are we talking about here? And what was the transition? Jaws and a bunch of other traits that we're going to focus on start in the fishes. And jaws may be the most obvious thing, but there are several other traits that show up at this point in evolution. So here's the gnathostome fishes, the jawed fishes. We got the cartilaginous fishes, and then we got the bony fishes. So if we're just focusing on fishes still, these are the groups we're worried about, the cartilaginous and the bony. Cartilaginous fishes, there you go, thanks, shark. And bony fish, then just about everything else you think of. When you think of a fish, it's a bony fish. Angelfish there. Okay. There's a bunch of things that show up here, a bunch of synapomorphies. I just picked a few to focus on. These are traits that are widespread or throughout the gnathostomes. We hypothesize they show up down here. We have fossil evidence for a lot of these things, but probably not all of them. I made a list here, and I'll go through these one by one, but that's our starting list there. We've got jaws, that's probably the most obvious one. Semicircular canals, that's in your inner ear. There's on 3 pairs of those, 3 on each side. Jawless fishes only have 1 or 2. And this is important. Internal pelvic and pectoral girdles. Here's your pectoral girdle up here, the bones that support your arms, right? And this is your pelvic girdle here, the bones that support your legs. And this is where they show up. They show up in early jawed fishes. I like thinking about niches. You haven't figured that out. Vertebrates evolved for a long time in a world with no jaws. And diversified in all those things we call ostracoderms and conodonts. And they were the top of the vertebrate heap. They fed probably by scraping or by sifting through detritus, sifting through sediments, but they weren't taking chunks out of things. And that probably everyone was happy about that. When jaws show up, that's a big change. It's one of those fundamental changes in evolution. There's a couple of things that were associated with jaws. Here's an early jawed fish. Well, first off, we can now take chunks out of things, right? We're a much more potent predator. But I think what's less obvious, and maybe the actual reason behind the original evolution of jaws, is they were able to open and close their mouth much more efficiently and get a really good seal when they closed it. Jaws initially probably greatly enhanced their respiration. They probably could move water much more efficiently across their gills. And so you have the two aspects here. One, we're more effective predators, and now we're more active too, because we're processing more oxygen as we move around. So it was a big shift in what was going on in those oceans. And when this kind of stuff shows up, this kind of stuff starts to disappear. When the jawed fishes start to diversify, the jawless fishes start to lose their diversity. And they're losing their niches. They're being outcompeted for their niches. They're probably being eaten. And we end up with, again, hagfishes and lampreys. Two freakish survivors. So when we look at the adaptations that define jawed fishes, we see improvements in these things. We see improvements in mobility, in sensory biology, in respiration and circulation. And we see a tremendous broadening of the dietary niche. So we don't like to talk about evolution as being something that, directional, being improvement. But these are all, improvements. It's the only word I have there. And those original jawed vertebrates that defined that first jawed vertebrate set off a radiation that took over. And the world changed. I don't have a good time frame on that when that happened. We're talking. I'm going to put a date on it. Okay, let's take a couple minutes here, a few minutes. Let's